Hello, hythlo day. Well, we're at one of those, it's late night. It's Sunday, I've been programming. I made these notes a day or two ago, probably, on the last, 50 minutes of your video. Now, one complication is that we've had comments and stuff. I mean, we might have gotten to some agreements in my reply to the first 16 minutes, might have clarified some things and so on and so forth. So I'm going to try to go through this. One thing that I really find interesting is that we do have like different modes. There's some compatibility in there in terms of, hey, these things are interesting and we both agree, but you know what I mean? I get on your nerves. Some things, I choose some words. It's like I'm not actually having a thought that would bug you, but I use some words that you take, and vice versa. And I think it's good that we're both trying hard to handle that. And as you know, I've watched some videos of yours that I haven't seen over the last couple of years, which is nothing about you really. Nobody I subscribe to do I see all their videos. I would love to, but there's just too many. But in your case, there's some videos, because I'm subscribed to you, but that I've skipped, and that display a progression in the way you present yourself. And it's interesting because watching you, frankly, he'll love that I mentioned him probably, but Snake Plisskenist, your responses to Snake Plisskenist show your ability to adapt to the internet, let's say. But anyway, I don't want to go into that. So this is me going through notes. It's kind of interesting to read through, especially, someone like myself. My notes are not, they're like esoteric comments often. It's like, what the fuck what's that supposed to mean? So it's late. I am, and this might be a video you want to just put on in the background. Maybe not even watch, but since it's directly to you, probably watch. But I'm not sure we want to expand. I think from what you said in the rest of this video that I'm replying to, I think it would be a good time to focus and be like, yeah, all of that's very lovely, but what about this fucking thing I've been asking you, Piro? I would appreciate that kind of thing. Remember, from my side, it's hard to know when we respond in these very complete ways, which I love, this overview, and, it's sort of a mapping or territorial description. It's hard to know which things are like, well, here's all the territory. It's hard to know which part is like, but by the way, here's the thing, it looks to me like you're avoiding, like you're looking away from it all the time. It's hard. You really need help, okay? And it can be frustrating that it takes so long, but let's admit it. It's because it takes us a while to know which things it is that we feel the other person should face more directly. It's hard to know which things we've said, are the most important to us, right? So I'm open to that, and I like both modes. So it's never like, hey, I'm not complaining. Don't bury that idea or that question in an hour vid. No, go ahead and bury it in there. But also, well, I don't know what the means are. I was going to say make a short video about that particular subject, or a PM, or just make that one first. And then I don't know. Sometimes it seems like you have to. Wow, there's 20 things I want to talk about, and it's like, but you know what? There's one that's most. I would hate to say don't talk about the 20 things. There's got to be a way to highlight or whatnot. I think in the second half of this video, which was the 50 minutes I didn't respond to already, that you actually clarified a lot of these things. It was clear to me what you were getting at. But based on my past experience, I would have to say I'll probably have that wrong. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, he's asked, this is what's important to him, and I'll go blah, 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 blah. And it'll be like when I used your model, and you'll go, no, no, no. I find that interesting. If somebody has the stamina to endure that from their side, I understand how exhausting it can seem. But to me, if you do it long enough, you will eventually get somewhere. You might not have the stamina. I might, plural you, have the stamina to do it. But as I say, I really respect that stamina. So, okay. Okay, the upfront things, notes I moved to the top. One difference between us is this whole thing of where I noticed you're like, let's just talk about the mathematics. Okay, to me, you have to understand, that comes across, I'm like, okay. But I'm not, you know, I'm more, the philosophy of math, I like math. And the philosophy of math is more what I'm talking about. So to be within mathematics is to ignore some of the questions, right? Like the Godel thing, one way of putting it, or what some people are claiming, is it's like, it limits what is in mathematics. And in mathematics, it means you've already assumed these truths. And if you want to ask, well, are those true? How does it, what's really going on? You know, you can't limit yourself to just being in mathematics, but I'm willing to do it in a, you know, in a particular conversation. But I still think that I am bringing in, you know, a philosophical perspective on this, where mathematics, just like natural philosophy, and, you know, it's a subset of everything that's going on. Now, I want to ask about the idea of a priori truths, you know, the self-cause thing. And yes, I use the self-cause term. It's bound with theism, bound up in religion. It's present in the law, all sorts of things, okay? So to me, the mathematical debate or discussion is a part of philosophy, right? You know, and so the Godel angle too is like, it's like Russell was a philosopher, and this it's the transition, it's the transformation from philosophy, or even, let's just say, you know, the regular life, all sorts of things, into and out of mathematics. And that's the way I'm looking at it. I'm looking at this transformation in and out of mathematics, which is obviously a subset of all the things we're dealing with, right? So if you want to talk just math, fine, but it is a difficulty for me in the sense that I'm going to keep bringing it back. You know what I mean? I'm not going to ignore the axioms of math. That's what I'm talking about in this context, remember, of, you know, consciousness and other things. Yet this is a topic worthy of its own discussion in its own right, but it is complicated, right? And we're talking about mathematics. You know, to me, the Penrose thing, I don't really agree with Penrose, but the part I like is the way he uses it to try to describe that there's something computers aren't getting. We must not just be a computer as we currently understand it. We must be some computer of, you know, of the next sort. All right, you went into the part about, well, I barely make an argument. Well, look, you know, if I'm meandering or arguing against things, you know, it's like, this is a complaint. I was in whatever the current non-stickum is with Gary last night. It's like, you know, I'm a skeptic. I like to collect ideas. That could mean that I'm a hobbyist. Like, hey, look at this idea. No, I don't believe it. I just thought it was interesting. Hey, look, I got another one. It says the opposite. Well, that's cool too. You could say, oh, so you don't have your own ideas. No, but I do, right? I mean, I get bitched at all the time about particular ideas I've drawn from this process. On the other hand, it is true that I think we're talking about in consciousness and the meaning of the incompleteness theorems. We're talking about things which are at the edge of knowledge. It doesn't mean they're sophisticated. Really, think about, okay, the edge of knowledge 3,000 years ago. It's a bunch of things that to us are simple. So probably the things we are considering at the edge of knowledge, us thinking these are deep, 1,000 years from now, they might go, wow, those people were really simple-minded, right? But it is the edge of knowledge. And so, it's good to be skeptical there, especially. That's where skepticism, when you're thinking about a lot of ordinary things, seems exotic, and why have it? Why bother? This is where skepticism makes sense. Let's remember we don't know. So yes, with Penrose, for example, one of the reasons I'm not defending him is because I don't agree with him. But I think he's making some interesting points. I think there's things in what he is saying that we can take out. And there's things he's saying, I guess, that I do think are good presentations of the subject, like the incompleteness theorems that, you and I might disagree on. But some of this stuff, like pulling the Platonic form, and I get what you're saying about, a lot of mathematicians, it's like, Plato, I think Platonic, but not this world of forms and all that nutty stuff. But there's this purity in this. Plato has an idea of form that makes it, wow, form. So there's something to that. It's been really productive. I do understand that doesn't mean that, Plato's this ancient philosopher with. Just because you like Plato doesn't mean you like every single thing and all, and I understand, especially in mathematics and logic, there's a lot of Platonists. It's not like they're believing everything Plato said and they're like, yeah, we should make a country just like in the Republic. It's more that he has this feel of forms interacting that is, that's his positive part. And it's, and I don't buy that part of Penrose trying to say that. But then again, I want to be open-minded. I'm like, what, even though I'm kind of disposed against that, it's like, I kind of see what you're getting at. And the part that I actually, okay, hey, I agree with, at least you've shown this, is that I think he's right that Godel shows we have to make assumptions. That means, to get mathematics. And as far as I'm concerned, we have to have mathematics. So that means we have to make assumptions. Boom, period. Now, how do we know which ones to make? Not all of the assumptions we possibly could make generate mathematics. Now, as I've been trying to say, my whole life, I pretty much thought, well, it's evolution, it's trial and error, it's empiricism. You actually test the law of causation, and if I push this over, does it fall? Yep. If I push this over, does it fall? You can actually test the law of identity. It's so easy to test, it's like you don't even know you're testing it. So it can be established by trial and error, but the open-minded part is like, okay, Penrose, you're saying no, there's more to it. We actually see that, and we don't even always test it. We sometimes visualize a test. So I'm going, okay, I get that. But still, all I really agree with is like, yeah, maybe there's some quantum computing based, quantum computing algorithm based modeling going on. He likes to call that opening up to a world of, Platonic reality. Well, he's a mathematician. They just love that. So that could be poetry, that part, as far as I know. But I'm trying to be open-minded, and I'm thinking like, well, you know what? If there is something that you can compute out from some logical system, and then some weird logical system to the n in quantum computing, maybe there is something to that, to the basic logic. I mean, as a relativist, I still think, well, what about the people in the universe where they can't go slower than the speed of light? Who knows what it's like over there? You know what I mean? In the extremes, But in the realm of things that apply to human beings, it is possible to find these kinds of, arguments. It's like any physical thing that has a brain to think with is going to have to, is going to discover the same plight, is going to discover induction. Why? How is that? You know what I mean? So it's a dream of his that I can acknowledge and say, I'm not going to poo-poo it because there is a question there. And so I do some meandering and go, hey, look, that's interesting. Because this is the edge of knowledge, right? In a lot of ways. So, okay, I haven't even started my comments on that. Well, these are comments that were moved to the top, so I haven't really started the chronological comments yet. No, I just wanted to summarize that, the relevancy of the incompleteness theorems to consciousness, to me, all I would claim is that merely that however humans arrive at their axioms, it's not from a rule system. Right? They use some other method. Okay? So, and furthermore, nothing, no conceivable or even inconceivable theoretical creature, it's theoretically impossible to arrive at those axioms that way from a rule system. Right? So the very first rule system by which you establish something as complete as a mathematics needs something else. Now, I'm fine with that being good old trial and error. Okay, I'm an empiricist. That's good enough for me. I like dirt and friction. But, with the Platonic idea and thinking, no, this makes sense in just general, I'm open-minded to that. I mean, and this is literally just in the last couple of years that I've become open-minded to that. Prior, I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. The way we figure out, the law of identity is that, a thing keeps being itself. Look, it's still itself. Is it still itself? I'll look away. Oh, it's still itself. You know what I mean? It is testable. It's so obviously testable, you almost don't even need to test it. The testing happens on its own. Continuity. So trial and error is satisfactory. I like to be open-minded because I do realize, and especially from a mathematical perspective, there's still like, okay, so you found it by trial and error. But trial and error doesn't make it right. That's just a testing means. What actually makes it right? And maybe there is something. Maybe there is something in a new kind of logic or computation or some weird thing that can try an infinite number of cases at once without running a limit. I don't know. I'm just trying to be open-minded on that. Okay. So this was from 17 minutes on. This is going to be a really long video, probably. What, 18 minutes, and I've just started, basically. Oh, that's terrible. You don't have to watch this. If you turn it off, I won't be insulted. Okay. You brought up Russell. Why do I mention him? Well, I mean, at that context, I was just mentioning it because, as you said, it's possibly relevant. I mean, Godel and Russell threw some wrenches in the works. Now, Godel's is amazing. It's amazing. Like, as far as I can figure out, he's amazing. He's one of these, he's an Einstein plus. It's really amazing what he established, especially compared to what he believed. Right? He's a Platonist, as far as I understand. I've never really looked into his philosophy work, but as such. But yeah, anyway. But Russell didn't do something quite as clear, but the whole Russell paradox and the set of all things, and there is no set of all sets. And when I was being taught that, in college in philosophy of mathematics, and at first I'm like, yeah, so, a set can't contain all the not sets that aren't not itself and stuff. Of course, to me a set I think physically, I guess, about things in physical metaphors. So a set is a container, and sets that contain themselves, it's like, what? But because I was taking class and was careful and stuff, I started to get the fact, this expectation that it's like, well, this is a symbolic system. As far as we know, a set can have anything we say is in it, and they kind of thought, and the logic will work out. Even if it's a weird case, it'll work out. And so the Russell paradox, sort of blew up set theory, which is an awesome thing and is still useful and remains awesome. So, unfortunately, it showed that their reliance on it, that there were some failure points, basically. And so people are working on all kinds of ways to address that and say, well, maybe there's a way to make these statements not, considered not well formed. Or, you just... And I think they're basically onto it. I always thought when I finally thought I got a little bit of a gist of it is that, the basic thing is that you have to order things. Things are at different levels of abstraction. So this whole constructability idea of, well, you have to construct the set first, and then it has members, and then you construct another set. So, it's really just like with the liar's paradox, a way of trying to prohibit self-reference, because you can only reference things that are at a lower level of abstraction. One predicate can reference objects, a super predicate can reference that, and so on and so forth. And I don't know how it's going to work out, but I just brought it up because it sort of is another wrench in the hopes that everything was going to be smooth. We've had the liar's paradox for a long time, but that paradoxes like that, you can try to argue why they're not well formed, or how do you deal with that? Basically in a mathematical system, if you want it to be complete, you want things like that, like, well, you can't refer to yourself, you're a sentence. I was trying to figure out, it talks about itself, that almost makes it second order. Okay. So one thing is that you said that I'm doing this without a foundation. But that's also where we come into barely making an argument or not, is that I'm seeing a phenomena and I'm investigating it. It's not that I don't have enough, particular views for people to disagree with. I do. So I don't see a problem with that. But, partly we are just looking. It's like we should look at... I think we should all look at the behavior of a paramecium and admit, that's interesting. It looks like it wanted something. It looks like it was afraid of something. It looked like it was panicking. And we should say, but just look like, might not really be that way. But I think we should admit to seeing the phenomena, right? So I think in the mathematics, we should admit that there's the phenomena that we have to assume. And if this means we have to guess and take faith in a particular proposition, that's a problem. It shouldn't just be faith. And if it is faith, well, even then it's not really faith. It's that your intuition somehow can find the thing that you should believe in, and sometimes it could be the rule of induction and you get math out of it. then it would be something about your intuition. And this is what I see Penrose is saying. It's like, look, there is an understanding. You can see that. Why? Because you're doing a kind of a quantum computation that isn't just rule-based, but it's trial and error all at once based. So it's like a quantum computing is like formalized infinity, and yet it's not complete, because when you do a quantum computer, it'll be right 98% of the time or 99% of the time, but it might not be actually right. So you know what I mean? There's like it's like the universe has built in no perfect answers for you. You can have a perfect answer, doesn't apply to reality, you know, in theory, but there's always a gimmick that makes it not exactly perfect. Now, I agree that none of these things about Gödel's theorem really speak to human awareness or animal awareness, you know, in and of itself. But the phenomena are indicated by other experiences, you know, rather than the Gödel issue. But it's interesting to me, and so there is an indirect, at least, relationship. It could be possibly more direct, but I mean, I'll admit it's somewhat indirect. But it's interesting that that we found that mathematics, this very determined and computable thing, you know, is not sufficient for how we have to live. We have to make these, we have to, let's say mathematics is the most important thing in the universe. We have to make assumptions to start doing it. Right? So somehow human awareness is able to make those assumptions. All right. Now, Penrose has a little kind of a magical, but I don't really think so, but let me just play devil's advocate. Magical idea. It's like, well, because of quantum computation and we have access to this Platonic realm. Look, I can offer what I've believed and still believe, that, you know, in some sense, trial and error, evolution, try this one. If you believe the law of the included middle, you might find that you don't do so well figuring out who stole your bananas. You know what I mean? You need good logic to survive, so people that get good logic figure out, survive. Mathematicians don't like that because it means, well, maybe a few bad axioms slipped in there and we just happen to survive with them. It doesn't really prove them. Okay, Penrose is like, well, hey, we can sort that out. And I'm like, well, maybe we can. Maybe it's just evolutionary. And this is where it's like I have some opinions, and we're also just going, hey, look, there's that and that and that and that. Those are all interesting. Look, we disagree on things, but can we agree those are all, interesting data? And that's where we are. So my interest is not in finding a Platonic way to establish the axioms. I'm fine with an empirical system, trial and error, and so forth. Though I wonder if I'm, it's like, well, is that enough? But anyway, I don't have to defend the Penrose system. I'm not intending. So I think some of in your video, you're like, well, why don't you defend these things I'm criticizing about Penrose? Is because I am presenting it as interesting. And like I said earlier in the video, which parts I would say I agree with, or which are interesting, which I'm saying, hey, this looks relevant. We could disagree, and maybe I should defend that it's interesting. But I don't believe Penrose, verbatim. And I don't ever think that somebody gets it, perfectly right. There's theories, and it's like, hey, I like this part, not this part. This is, I think in Penrose's case, to me, he comes across like one of these kind of tending towards idealist, though in a very practical way. I really like him. But idealist where the idea of the Platonic realm is, he loves it. He wants it to be real. Whether it's real or just metaphorically real, we can, meaning we can apply it as a metaphor and it's apt, or what, there's still something to learn from what he's saying. So the part I overlap is with him is that he came up because he did all this quantum mathematics with Hawking and whatever. You know, he has this idea that quantum computing is being used in living creatures, and I think that's likely at this point. I think it's interesting and likely that that's probably true, and interesting that he, having done all this math, is like, hey, with quantum computation you can have access to Platonic truths. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so but it's also just the kind of hopes and dreams that mathematical logicians tend to have more than me. It's an interesting thought. Me, again, I like the dirt and the friction, gravity, you know, everything. The physics, I like physical, ultimately. And the fact that math is good for describing it is neat, but, you know, in the end there's friction. And often with math, he's like, well, I'm going to skip that. That's too complicated. So we do have agreement on the brains doing calculus. I think it's just that calculus is one way of describing the phenomena that's trying to be approximated and estimated. And the thing is, though, quantum computers, the interesting thing about quantum computers is if you have a crude model, if it's totally wrong, then you're screwed. But if you have a crude model, let's say a model that, let's say you have a computer model of a flying body, you know, and when you look at it, you take a linear path. So you don't calculate the parabola, especially in 3D. It's not even going to look like a parabola. And so you don't do that, and you just assume it's going to be linear. So that'll have a distortion, and it'll be accurate to a certain degree. If with trial and error, though, you could use such a thing, run it a bunch of times with, in other words, you're taking your linear estimate off 2 points of the arc. Boom, boom. So there it goes. Take two different ones, and then it goes somewhere else. Because, right, the part you've already seen is a projected parabola. So if you took all the lines, you're going to have a bunch of estimates that you could study, that you could data process your own estimates that get spit out of the model. It's actually possible to get to the right, you know, a parabolic solution through an estimation method that does a bunch of linear interpolations trying to circle in on that. And that's what I think, you know, brains do. So it's not doing calculus. It's doing something that really looks a lot like primitive modeling plus quantum computing. Because we do so much of it at once. You know, even stupid human thoughts are incredibly intelligent, and they go wrong in pretty intelligent ways. It's interesting. It's human brains are, all brains, but definitely human brains are, I mean, I'm still in the human school of, our brains are pretty amazing, and I think animal brains are way more amazing than most humans think, but human brains are still definitely, we have most knowledge of them, and they're doing some surprising things to anybody that knows about computation, the way computers work. And it's like, you know, what they're doing that we can't do yet is, it's not to be taken lightly. It's not just like, well, we need a faster CPU with more cores. Something more than that. Something more than that. So, yeah, I made another note about the subtitle of just the math discussion, because, you know, Penrose is saying there's something beyond math, if math is just rule systems. I think he's also saying we could expand math to have more than rule systems, but he's also saying there's a quantum computation you won't ever capture with the rule system. But I don't believe that. I think just like Turing, people will model these things. but it may or may not look like mathematics as we understand it now. But come on, it's going to be highly formal and technical. We'll just expand our idea of mathematics to include it when we figure it out. I think he's made a good point that we haven't figured it out yet. We shouldn't draw too much into that. But like you were saying, it's like, well, there's other ways to establish. He's really saying there's another way, and he's making some suggestions about what it is. I think you and I might be on the same side and Penrose on another, where it's like, no, I don't get access to the Platonic realm. I go and look at the actual world and check. You know what I mean? I like that approach. And I think it could be formalized, and I understand the problems with it and synthetic truth. I understand the hope that we would found all of our epistemology on analytic truths, and it sucks that they have to start with synthetic, but look, that's just, I don't know. Anyway. What I do like about Penrose's approach is that, unlike mystics and philosophical intuitionalists, instead of saying, look, Godel proved math won't do it, you know what I mean? Kind of like, oh, look, even a mathematician proved math sucks. You know, Penrose is like, no. What this means is that we can expand our understanding of math. It needs to include understanding itself. I mean, it doesn't matter that he chose or tries to choose that word. I don't think that's even set in stone. But, you know, he puts it as having access to this Platonic realm, which is a bit too much for me, but I think it could be seen also as a metaphor for coming up with a mathematics of axioms. You know, and if it's not like rule-based mathematics, it's some sort of algorithmic or statistical or characterized with a, you know, an infinite Turing machine and magic Turing machine. You know, it's going to be a new field of math, right? When they figure it out, right now, we haven't figured it out. It'll be like, it's beyond math. When they figure it out, it'll be like, it's a new kind of math, right? You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what Penrose is saying. And Godel showed that we need that. But in their era, and people like Hilbert, it's kind of like, oh, we got failed. We were undermined. And it was undermined because of what they hoped to do, like you were saying. But really, some guy's going to come up with a solution, and it may be satisfactory to some and not to others, and somebody will come up with a better solution after that, and so on and so forth. But I think we'll have one of these girdles of, well, here's how we do assume these things. And I also kind of, you know, I just happen, the universe is ironic and a little bit of a tease, and it's going to go, hey, here's how it works, and here's the part that now, you know, you can't know this part, haha. You know what I mean? It's not, we know everything. That never happens. But we know more and more, and then there's some little trick, like an uncertainty principle or whatever, that is a hard pill for some people. And I think with mathematics, if it turns out that, well, you have to start with axioms that are trial and error, and the old school mathematicians are going to be like, well, that's not good. I wanted to know I was in the Platonic realm, and it's just one of infinite realms. But I think that'll work out. And I still think there's a question of why, well, how come some of these assumptions work so well and some make crap? Okay. So, I mentioned if you believe in the qubit. The thing is, if you think quantum mechanics is just a statistical description, doesn't describe, you know, there is no probability wave, then the qubit's impossible. I think you should consider that. Okay, some people, and I believe, claim to have made qubits and done simple quantum computations, and I believe that. But there's more proven to do, and but the thing is, if the qubit if the probability, the idea that probability is a material phenomena, that it travels along as probability and doesn't get realized, if that's not true and it's just a statistical description where the math works out, then the qubit will not be possible. Okay, so that's all I'm saying. The quantum computer will have structural elements. There's a lot of work going on in this. I've tried to read some of the stuff that comes out. I've been reading some good stuff lately about how, it's not like it's going to solve every NP-hard problem or necessarily be able to crack passwords, because there's classical restrictions. It's not like you can just do whatever you want. It's difficult. It's tricky. There's rules. There's certain, gates you can't go through easily or at all, right? There's limits. And it requires classical parts, because a quantum computer, though it can do this amazing thing, it doesn't do it 100% of the time, right? A classical computer, if it can calculate something and come out with 10 digits of accuracy, it'll always be 10 digits of accuracy. Right? Well, the quantum computers aren't like that. The quantum computer will give you a right answer 99% of the time, 1% it's fucked up. Well, how can you solve that? Well, depending on what answer you're looking for, you can do a classical check, right? The classical computer would have to search a billion, solutions and find one. The quantum computer just goes, here you go, but it might be wrong. The classical computer, instead of doing a billion calculations, can just do one. Ka-ching, was it right? Oh, it's right. Some things you can't classically check like that. In that case, you could run the quantum computer 3 or 4 times, because it's very unlikely they'll all be wrong with the same number, but it's very likely that they'll all be right with the same number. So if 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 have the same number, you take that one. So there's various elements, and you were just pointing out that they'll have structural elements, and I think this is important. All the principles of quantum computing, it could do this kind of thing and that kind of thing, mean shit all. In the end, you're going to have to write programs, and what they can do in theory won't mean shit compared to what they can actually do. In a way, we could just say, forget Penrose. I'm saying that given our agreement, you and me, on how brains work, right, through experience, that there's a heuristic and trial and error, whatever, however they really go together, those are the elements. Quantum computing, while limited by the above and the structure and the practicality of interacting and doing the computation and using it and doing it and using it, it is good at this type of thing. I think that's a safe statement by me. So like using a crude approximation to actually get a solution that's on the level of calculus. What computers do, it's like they can't take integrals, but they can estimate them to an arbitrary, precision. That turns out to be good enough. We don't do it the same way in our brain, but we have a way of, I think, of estimating it down. Ding, 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 ding. Don't know how it's done. I've always thought parallel computing might, just algorithmically in parallel computing, there might be ways to do that. But I'm more and more convinced that it takes a little bit of quantum computing and that we're going to find that in the brain. Because if you have a simple model that does an approximation that's not just totally off, but it's simple, like linear instead of quadratic, and plus a quantum computer, you can run a simulation a lot and take a, sort of take a successful run that you double check at the end. Your answer won't be perfect. You're not using a perfect model. You brute forced it, and yet you can get a really good answer that way. And that's kind of very similar to what we do in computers, except for in some problems, the computer can't do it without the help of quantum computation. Like the I'm glad to hear you are familiar with the traveling salesman problem. It's an important part of this kind of thing, and not too hard to intuit about. He brought up the deep understanding about high-level questions. Now, I think answering how consciousness works is pretty deep understanding. So that's that. Okay, we'll talk about levels in a second, though. And the point of using different types of logical thinking at different levels. Okay, so like C++, machine language, transistors. The thing is here, if something at a low level contradicts what a claim made at a higher level, the higher level's wrong. Right? So the lower levels are like higher courts. You know, they supersede. You can think whatever you want at the C++ level, but if what you, for example, the abstract Turing machine idea doesn't model a mechanical failure. It doesn't model corrosion effects. It doesn't model being altered because of a cosmic ray. Cosmic ray can come hit a memory chip. Boom, bit gets changed. More than one bit. So if someone argued a computer was perfect from theory, from the fact that it's a Turing machine and it should run forever, and when you're programming in an abstract language like C++, it should run, you know, a while true loop should run forever. It should never break from that infinite loop. Well, the transistor analysis explains from a quantum mechanical point of view why, no, you're wrong. Things will happen. Tunneling events, improbable events will eventually, it will not run forever. It will eventually fail, in fact, because the chance is blah, 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 that, you know, a photon will funnel or a cosmic ray will hit or whatever you want to consider. It will not run forever. And the lower level will reveal that, and you cannot violate a lower level. Heuristics versus an analytic analysis. This is an issue I love. As a programmer, I try to find analytic solutions because then I can write a little thing that, you know, decompresses into a complex reality. You want to analyze the phenomena and get it down that way. But what I find is to make very smart programs, often, well, always, you need a heuristic. I think of heuristic as a configuration, analytic as an algorithm. You said at one point that evolution isn't going to wait around for quantum mechanics. How old is photosynthesis? It's pretty old. I don't think it had to wait around for it. Okay, levels. Talking about levels, I need to make a whole video on levels, so I'll try to keep it short here. One, the idea that quantum mechanics is low level, so it only applies to low level. I disagree. Right? I understand this idea that you need to use the logic appropriate for the level, but you need to remember I'm saying that at the lower level it supersedes. This is the supreme court at the low level of transistors. The idea that quantum mechanics is low level isn't really fair because it's at every level. Dude, glass. I mean, crystals in general. Why does light, optical light go through? I mean, these are quantum mechanical properties. Quantum mechanics really is at every level. Okay. What I would make the whole video about is that in object-oriented design or software design in general, the concept of class networks and levels, which are two different things, and I always use both of them in my designs, are very important. And it's exactly because at every level you have a different logic. At this level I think of it this way. It's a machine with a disk. At this level I think of it this way. It's a pipe with the bytes. At this level I think of it, it's a, you know, a data file with a header. And at this level I think of it as taken from an instrument in a particular mode. And at this level I think of it as a whole program of observations. And, you know, the levels exactly are like what you're saying. So I agree with there's an appropriate logic for an appropriate level. But this stack of levels, it's important to remember that you're trying to come up with higher level logics. If they violate, if you choose some rule up here that's convenient, that violates down here, which sometimes you do because it's like, I don't like this restraint, so I invent an abstraction to avoid it. You're going to have to be careful. Sometimes you can flip it around. It's like, I don't have to think of that as a 0 or 1 anymore. I can think of it as just a floating point number. I have a system that translates the zeros and ones into floating point. I get to think of it that way, but it's really zeros and ones. And then sometimes you're going to have the floating point, round off errors, and it's going to be like, oh yeah, it's zeros and ones, right? So when they start to conflict, when that lower level is like, it is the one that wins, right? I don't think the brain is too very analogous to a computer. I mean, you said that it can do computation, but computers can't do it. So, I mean, that's just our guess, right? Remains to be proven. But I think that cells do have a reactive, analog that is to a computer. It's at least like a computer, or it's something like ours that can do computations and has some other like quantum computing ability. Cells are ridiculously complex. I want to remember that. The question of, is the consciousness in the circuitry, like the physical part, the wires, or the algorithm? That's what we're asking, right? I think it's the stuff. I think the software flavors it. I think our software flavors our human experience, and I think some of our particular hardware flavors our human experience. It's wetware. It's not entirely separate. It's physically built into the same stuff a lot of the time. But I'm just saying, I think it's got to be in the neurons. I don't think it can be in the kind of program or the kind of network that they're connected to. That flavors it, makes it more intense, it gets recapitulated or whatever. Now, in the Wikipedia quote you emphasize, let me just go there. Incompleteness theorem. You highlight the sentence, it's from the very top. For any such system, there will always be statements about the natural numbers that are true, but that are unprovable within the system. Okay. Right after that, there's the very next sentence is the second incompleteness theorem, an extension of the first, shows that such a system cannot demonstrate its own consistency. Okay, that's what I've been talking about. And furthermore, that although there is this issue about statements that are unprovable within the system, that's, my understanding is that's from second order logic. That in first order logic, it's complete. But the reason that might not really seem complete is because the rules you need to establish it are themselves not proven. That would take the second order thing. And so that's the way I see that works out. But regardless of that little addendum, I'm talking about the second incompleteness theorem. This is a sentence right after the one you highlighted in the wiki page, and it says the second incompleteness theorem, an extension of the first, shows that such a system cannot demonstrate its own consistency. That's what we're talking about. It's also true that in second order logic you can make statements that cannot be proved or disproved, and yet which are true or are false. That's just an interesting thing. It's come up in our conversation, but it's not really the reason I'm not emphasizing, you're saying this is what you think and that's what you're emphasizing, but I've been emphasizing this issue of or for that matter Penrose, of this not demonstrating your own consistency, which again I refer to the idea that you always have to assume principles, so of course that's how that works. So I'm a little bit confused, I think, about the proving of the axioms. Some people thought we could prove them and we didn't have to assume them, that's all. And then I've been willing to accept we assume them and that we base our assumptions on trial and error. And then I'm also willing to think that Penrose is saying, no, there's ways to figure them out from reason, just not with good old-fashioned 2,000-year-old rule systems. Maybe there's something new. I mean, we thought up some pretty cool new things in the last 100 years. I mean, yeah, maybe there's a new kind of logic. Oh, in that kind of logic, yeah, of course, law of excluded middle. Hilbert expected to get that kind of a solution right out of the first order logic itself, and that would have been lovely. But just because it didn't work, like if in second order logic you have things that can't be proved through traditional proof methods, well, what if you can run them through a quantum computer and check them to 99.999% accuracy? Would that be good enough? And if you had a formal language that described that process, would that count as math? Probably. I think that's kind of what Penrose is hoping for. Or maybe not. Maybe he's just saying, we'll never do it, but the quantum computers can do it in our brain. But I don't know. Penrose sort of likes to talk about that kind of thing. I think he would imagine if our brains are doing it, we do have access. We can say things about it. So I think Penrose's argument, my take on it, is that he shows a rule system can't prove itself. You always need another rule system. Ultimately, you need something besides a rule system to start the process. And it doesn't mean it's not possible to establish that initial rule system. It just has to be something different than a formal rule system that does that. You establish it with some other kind of system. It doesn't, like if it's empirical, it's like, well, I checked the apple. And then I put it in a safe and I opened it up. It was still the apple. Hey, I proved the law of identity. Okay, but he's saying, no, there's maybe some, quantum Turing machine way of doing it. Right? If you have a Turing machine, like, updated so that it's quantum computing able. I think that's what he's saying. I think that's what he wants. And when he goes too far, ruminating, poetic, and waxing about the Platonic world, which I find a little bit endearing, but it just doesn't suit me. I think that's where he's going, because he wants that. But, fine, that doesn't have to be achievable for it to still be a good point that, oh yeah, we need something besides a rule system, and we don't have to assume there's nothing good enough, and we just have to assume, pull out of our ass ideas. Maybe there is a way to justify these. And I think the empiricism, we'll test them, is a good way. But, hey, look at all the things we have proved in math. I mean, I think it's... I trust mathematicians enough if they're like, hey, we have another idea of the way we might do this, and it's not just like pulling out of our ass style. Go for it. And even if it's like, it turned out to be just a more sophisticated pulling it out of your ass style. I mean, it works so fucking good. I'll be like, okay, keep trying and whatnot. And if we really just assume these things, I mean, I don't feel too out in the cold, right? Because it's like, yeah, we check. We check. We got 5 billion years. We check a lot of times. And we found some axioms that are good. And then when you assume those, boom, you get mathematics with actual proofs and logic with actual proofs possible within the subdomain that is incredibly applicable to so many things. That's a pretty good subdomain. Logic doesn't apply to everything. Just 99% of everything that's important to us. You know what I mean? It's like people were hoping for 100%. I'm an empirical kind of person. 99.9% is pretty good. So math was only undermined in what was hoped for. I don't know, you are mathematically minded. I totally sympathize with that hope. Of course, it's 70 years, 80 years over. So, you know what I mean? It's like, that was sweet. It's nice to hope. But I think we can hope for something that's even greater, I mean, it's not like the value of math is going to go away, right? So however we find out that it works is going to be cool. So, yeah. And finally, I would like to say Godel proved, I think, that first-order logic is free from internal contradictions. All right, and it is complete, is my understanding. All right, cheers. What's that, 3-hour video? Oh, an hour. Back at you, my friend. So, yeah, you don't have to watch this. If you got this far, congratulations. It's going to be, might be difficult, but if you do reply, probably let's just pick 1, 2. Let's go back to the 5-minute model. Pick one thing of like, fine, all that stuff you said, boy, I would like to answer it all and with how wrong you were, but I will pick this. Why are you ignoring this point? Because I don't, give me benefit of the doubt. I don't know what I'm ignoring, probably. And I consider this positive for me to have watched your video and go back and you. The only problem is it expands into such a great period of time, so we have to condense it back. But anyway, I wanted to do it because I wanted to go over my notes and think about them again. So I found the, you know, the last part of the video, it got more. I mean, it was interesting, the whole thing, but it got more interesting. It wasn't just like an hour repeating, oh, 20 minutes, and now I'll do that 5 more times, which often I find I do if I'm responding this way, because that just, people end up making the same points, and if you stop and respond, you end up making the same points. And so I wouldn't have minded had you kind of re-emphasized the same issues over and over. But you didn't. You went on and on. And actually, if I was going to focus on something, and I really think I might make a separate video on this, it's the levels thing. Because I think that's interesting. I don't know how important it is. I hope it's important. But also, you know, I think of software designs. I have lots of ideas on levels and rules between transitioning levels, and when I'm programming, I'm like, oh, I'm in this level, I have to think this way. Oh, I'm in this level, I think a different way. You know what I mean? So this idea that levels have appropriate reasoning, very interesting to me, but also the relationship between a lower level reasoning and an upper level reasoning. It's like the upper level reasoning, you're thinking for a little bit for convenience because you don't want to keep thinking of it this way, but this one still trumps. And you've got to do a bunch of tricky maneuvering to make sure they don't contradict each other. And there's always issues there. And then again, maybe that's just programming less than mathematical levels, or levels in physics, or levels of scale. So I find that a very interesting subject. So, okay. Yeah, I'm going to post this. I don't know, whatever. It's a little bit late. I hope I was coherent enough. It's like 1:30. But that's late for me now. I used to stay up later, but I'm going to bed earlier now, usually more like by 11 or 12. Okay, cheers.